All right, so now let's get into the data. So measures of central tendency, a lot of people are turned off by this, but it's really basic, and I'm sure that all of you have had some familiarity or experience with this already. So measures of central tendency help us to identify values in a series of scores. So I'm going to be covering mean, median, and range, and it's most appropriate to do this in data that don't clear to have or appear to have a trend in it. So you wouldn't want to report a mean or a median if you did find data that had trends in it, because taking an average might take away some of those trends and patterns. You'd want to report both. Perfect example of this. Do you notice a trend here? I would say that there's a positive increasing trend in this one. So if we're just going to be reporting the mean, which looks like it's about 8, then we wouldn't be able to tell our reader that there was this positive trend that was occurring. So in this situation, you might report the mean, but you definitely want to report it within the context of this positive increasing trend that was already apparent. So if I insert the mean line here, it's a little bit misleading, right? Because we do see this clear positive increasing trend. But what we can do with Singwin instead is insert this acceleration line. So the acceleration line is kind of like a moving average and tells us what the baseline problem is doing as far as a trend and how that would project into the future. So the acceleration line, we can see that, again, the problem seems to be increasing, and it's got this upward trend that would expect to continue. But in this data, number of cigarettes smoked doesn't really seem like there's a trend. There's no stability, not really a pattern here. So then you could just talk about the mean, because some days they're smoking a lot, some days they're not smoking that much. It's really hard to see any type of pattern here. So then you could just insert the mean line, and then that would just give you the average. But in this case, we've got a really big outlier here. So whatever happened on day 18, this person smoked 25 cigarettes. Maybe, who knows, maybe they got into a car accident. Maybe it was Packers game and they were getting beaten horribly. Who knows? But whatever happened on day 25 really, really stressed them out. So you wouldn't want to report the mean for this data because day 20 or the day they smoked 25 cigarettes is twice as much as most other days here. So what you can do instead is report the median. So the median cigarette smoked is the exact middle 50%. So if you took all the numbers of days or numbers of cigarettes they'd smoked each day, and taken the exact 50% number of cigarettes smoked. And the reason you'd report the median is because that one outlier would make it seem like they smoked more than they were actually doing on average. So if we take that same outlier out, it looks a little bit more normal, right? So an example I've always given of when you might use a median versus a mean would be like if we were going to be taking the average income of our class. And I would say that it's probably pretty similar between all of us. But if we added Warren Buffett into the room, all of a sudden it would be leading everybody to think that we're all making $1 million a year. But it's really just that one really big outlier that's throwing off our data. But if Warren Buffett came into our class and we took the median, it wouldn't really be influenced by him at all because we'd still have the same middle 50%. It might be thrown off a little bit, but just barely. All right, so in addition to reporting the mean, we also have to talk about the range. So range is the lowest score to the highest score. So here's an example, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 5. What's the range here? Well, it's just the highest score minus the lowest score, which is 5. So the range here is 5. All right, so a client who's receiving palliative care, tracking the number of crying spells per day. Their baseline mean is 2, and their intervention mean is 2. If you were looking at this, what would you say about the intervention? If the mean and the baseline is the same as the intervention, you'd say that it was ineffective, right? But what if we look at the range? So even though the baseline mean and the intervention mean is the same, if the range was rapidly decreased, so during their baseline the range was 5, some days they're having 0 crying spells, some days they're having 5 crying spells. But during the intervention phase, some days they were having 2 and some days they were having 3, but the range was only 1. So it's a lot more stable, right? So even though they were having crying spells, their emotion regulation was rapidly increased, right? Because it's a lot more predictable. Every day they're producing the same number of crying spells, and it seems like they're getting a little bit more accepting of it. versus during their baseline, it was all over the place. Some days maybe they're in denial, and some days they're in a horrible depression about it. So range really helps us to get a better idea of the stability in the behavior. All right, so for this series of numbers, what do you think would be more appropriate to report, the mean or the median? I would say the median, because there's the one outlier is that 13. So the 13 is going to really, really increase the mean here. So you don't want to report the median. But when you're reporting the median, you would also be reporting the range. So here we think that the range is 0 to 13, but that's a little bit misleading because of that one outlier. So what you can do instead is report the interquartile range. So the interquartile range is the 75th percentile highest score minus the 25th percentile. So here we can see the interquartile range, the 75th quartile minus the 25th quartile, and this is a good visual representation because the median here is 3 for the exact example I was just showing you, with an interquartile range of 5 to 1, which is 4. So if we would have just reported the range, it would be 13, and the mean probably would have been brought up a lot by the one day where there were 13 crying spells. But if you're reporting the median, that's a little bit more accurate, I would say. So again, just to summarize, when you're reporting the mean, you want to report the full range. As long as there's not any outliers, you can just use mean and range. But if there are significant outliers, then you would report the median and interquartile range. Generally, for people's projects, I really haven't seen people using median. Generally, they use mean and range. And again, mean is the average.